There are some moments in our time and in our history that are so great, so grand, they actually need to be distilled into a liquid and served up to you as a refreshing drink, as if this channel were a bar and you were its patrons. And this segment on Vice News about how Black Lives Matter, the organization, is this giant grifting organization, and even the families that it's supposedly set up to represent feel that way, is absolutely one of those moments. We're going to get into this video. It's going to be absolutely spectacular, and we're going to start with this activist in Missouri, so you know which case we're going to be referring to.
Time when Mike Brown and all that happened, I stayed literally right there. Took those 2 blocks, made a left, and went straight down to West Florissant, so where everything happened.
After Michael Brown was killed by Ferguson police in 2014, a new civil rights movement ignited.
So first and foremost, I will give Vice a little bit of points for saying killed and not murdered in the case of the Michael Brown case. However, all of those points that I have granted them go into the negative when they start talking about this alleged civil rights movement that formed in the wake of Michael Brown's killing. No, it didn't. Rioting and destruction that destroyed Ferguson formed in the wake of this non-civil rights movement. In fact, this was the beginning of a movement that was antithetical to civil rights, namely the right to private property, the right not to be harmed, and the idea that we have a fair and honest judicial system. Because as I point out multiple different times on this channel, the Michael Brown shooting was justified. I don't feel bad for any of these Ferguson people because they rioted over a 100% justified shooting. And had they bothered to read the Department of Justice report on Michael Brown, which by the way, you don't even have to read the whole thing, you just have to make it 8 pages in. I know if you're a long-term viewer of this channel, you've heard me say these words so many different times. You would find out that after Michael Brown committed a strong arm robbery at a convenience store, Officer Darren Wilson, fully within his rights to stop him, attempted to stop him. Brown decided to hit him in his face and then reach for Officer Darren Wilson's gun. This is confirmed by the forensic, since Michael Brown has burn marks on his hand, indicating he was within about a ½ an inch of the muzzle. Then, after fighting a gun didn't seem to work out for Michael Brown, he decided to take off, and Officer Darren Wilson pursued, because when you have violent criminals that go for your gun, you as a police officer have a responsibility to apprehend that person. And as shown by the forensic evidence, aka Michael Brown's blood splatter from his hand, Brown at some point decided maybe that he couldn't get away. I'm speculating on the motivation, doing a little bit of mind reading there. Doubled back and was charging Wilson at the time that he was shot. All of the narratives about hands up, don't shoot are completely disproven by the location of the shots on Michael Brown. All of this evidence is confirmed by 3 separate autopsies of Michael Brown. There was a state investigation into the shooting at the time, and there was an FBI investigation into the shooting running concurrently. They were going over the evidence at the same time. They both came to the same conclusion. And on top of that, Ferguson recently elected a district attorney for the sole purpose of reopening the Michael Brown case, a total left-wing activist shill, and he wasn't able to find any evidence that would lead to the charging of Officer Darren Wilson. Open and shut shooting. Anybody who tells you different is an absolute liar. Let's get that straight before we go into this guy whining about how his activism has now left the area deprived of resources. Oh, and really quickly, if you're gonna run that Michael Brown was just picking up some stuff that he got the night before, that is an incomplete surveillance video shown by the filmmaker who was behind Stranger Fruit. If you watch the full video, you can clearly see that the store owners did not accept Brown's trade of marijuana for cigarillos, and they restocked those items. Also, it made no sense for Brown, who showed up with a backpack and in a car, to want them to hold his items behind the counter. Michael Brown tried to trade weed for products. It didn't work. Then he came back and executed a strong arm robbery. You have no case with Michael Brown at all whatsoever.
But Tori Russell says the people around here are still struggling.
If you can imagine an apple tree in the middle of the hood. Used to be a lot of trees, tires, kids swinging, picnics, bonfires, all of that. Resources left after Ferguson. We went from being able to feed people and do all these things in our community to we resource deprived.
So I've decided to really take note and zero in on when people are using buzzwords in an odd manner, and this is one of those instances. Try to keep account in your brain of how many times the word resources gets thrown around in this, as if resources are something to just be handed out and they're somehow being deprived of those resources, likely due to some kind of evil white racism.
Can't get in, can't ask nobody for money, can't go to the foundations.
So this all happened after the uprising.
Again, the uprising was rioting. It was disgusting, disgraceful, and as we talked about multiple different times on this channel, it was not based on reality. It was based on a harmful myth that damaged these communities for years to come. Now that people know that this is an area where people riot, where lawlessness based on nothing is allowed to run rampant, of course, investment from actual businesses is going to be down. This is a much riskier neighborhood. The cost of doing business is significantly higher. Insurance premiums are going to be up. You're going to be required to take greater security precautions because this is an area prone to rioting over absolutely nothing, because the shooting was 100% justified.
It seemed like it was a embargo, a blockade on Ferguson when it came to resources in the movement.
An embargo and blockade on Ferguson when it came to resources. Now, he's referring specifically to what's been happening with the larger Black Lives Matter organization, not actually helping out the community and the smaller organizations that this guy works with or runs or whatever. Not really relevant. But the embargo, the blockade, has been imposed by you not showing respect for people's property, seeing destruction as a legitimate form of activism. I mean, this girl just called it an uprising, and you did not correct her that it was disgusting, violent rioting that has no place in a modern civilized country.
So where should those resources come from, or why has it been so hard to get them?
Honestly, I feel like BLM, Black Lives Matter, is taking all that up out of us.
Again, we hear about resources that should just be coming in and handed to these people. And I know I sound like I'm being really harsh on this guy and his organization, but it's deserved, and I am being that harsh for a purpose. First of all, if you want resources, don't beg for them or wait for them to come in. Go out and get a job and produce something. You have to expand your productive capacity. It's this idea that you're entitled to anything and everything other people earned that I can't stand. But in the case that he's talking about, that Black Lives Matter, this other bigger organization, is depriving their crummier organizations of resources, I'm actually in agreement on. Yeah, they grifted you, but the thing is, you were a race grifter. You were selling a false narrative. You just got grifted by national race grifters. You need to step up your game in that area because your local shtick isn't working, because people are just paying that forward to BLM, the organization.
After Ferguson, the Black Lives Matter movement went national. And after George Floyd died, it became a global rallying cry. In the face of the movement, Black Lives Matter Global Network became a registered nonprofit with a foundation, a political action committee, and $90 million in donations.
So the key thing for you to know there is the idea that they formed a political action committee. This is what a lot of those stories talking about how donations related to George Floyd ultimately ended up going to the Democratic Party, because Black Lives Matter, not uncoincidentally, is an organization that always seems to kick up during a presidential election year that seems to be directing money and influence toward the Democratic Party and labeling conservatives and Republicans who are correct about these issues more often than not evil white racists. So that's where their money is going. Joe Biden's pocketbook, or his campaign's pocketbook, or more accurately, to run ads on behalf of his campaign, as a political action committee tends to do.
Black Lives Matter has transformed into this mainstream kind of commodified movement. What has that been like, kind of watching that take off?
It's different to see a movement that we helped create be hijacked and co-opted, and like you said, sold to the masses, really to edify white people, right? So I feel like now they got some nicer chance, some things that Starbucks and Google can invest in. But does it mean we get freer?
So again, as long as this guy is on screen, I'm just gonna keep pummeling him because he deserves it. His problem is that he's not getting that money. It's that his scam, the Michael Brown scam, the lie that is Michael Brown, isn't making him and his organizations that money. So he's talking about how it's gone corporate, man. It's not really what it normally stands for. It's not helping. It's honestly being sold to white people bad, blah, blah, blah. That's what he's trying to talk to her about. And she's playing into it with, oh, it's going corporate or whatever. This was always a phony movement that was not addressing the real problems in the Black community. One of the biggest jokes about this is that the organization is called Black Lives Matter, and they have no public stance on black crime, something that results in the deaths of 7,000 Americans, Black Americans, every single year. That's how many murders happen in these communities by Black people, and they don't want to address any of them. And the even more crazy stat that I heard recently is that apparently the Klan that they're always trying to resurrect in their minds, even though they haven't killed somebody since 1980, only ever killed 3,800 Black people. So they lose more people, almost double, to murder within their own community than the Klan killed over an 86-year period when they were at their peak.
Russell, now a prominent activist, says that since BLM Global Network took off, it's overshadowed grassroots groups like his. It made it nearly impossible to raise money for a community that is still very much in need.
Again, like I said, this is what it's all about. He knows that more people are donating to the national organization than his organization, and he wants money. And get a load of the price tag that this guy is asking for with Michael Brown Sr.
The movement that is catapulted into the limelight has forgotten about Ferguson and the Freedom Fighters. We're asking that Black Lives Matter leadership funds $20 million to Ferguson organizers, organizations, and community foundations to do the work.
$20 million. $20 million for what? You are responsible for the destruction in that community. You hyped the big lie around Michael Brown, and now you're just upset because you've been grifted by bigger grifters. Also, don't ever put yourself in front of a green screen. It's just a bad look. Anybody can insert any background behind what you're saying and make you look even more ridiculous than you actually are.
Corporations and well-meaning people have been shelling out millions to help end racism. Meanwhile, people within the movement are fighting for its future. They want to know where all this money's going and who should be in charge of it.
So I love that corporations are allegedly spending money to end racism. That's why Ben & Jerry's made an ice cream. That's why Disney said Black Lives Matter. That's why Nike did whatever Nike did, I guess Colin Kaepernick. No, they're spending money to virtue signal. This is a marketing ploy. There's no actual underlying problem. The myth of Black people being massacred by the police in any large numbers because they don't deserve it and it's due to the fact that they're Black is just that. It's a myth. The overwhelming majority of these shootings are 100% justified. They are armed, and even the unarmed ones involve people arming themselves with police weapons, so they're in the act of being armed, resisting arrest, or they involve people in cars driving those cars at other people. This is what is included in the unarmed Black people category who are killed by police. And again, there's only about 19 of them a year. It's not a huge number. And when you break it down, the cases that are questionable are like 2 or 3 of these cases a year. So none of these organizations spending money to virtue signal about Black Lives Matter are pledging that money to end racism, because what is going on with Black people and police is not a racism problem. It is a crime problem. These people statistically commit way more crime, they resist arrest more, so we shouldn't be surprised that disproportionate to their population, but not disproportionate to their levels of violent crime, they are killed more by the police. Also, in raw numbers, white people killed twice as much by the police as Black people. Multiple different studies show that the police hesitate more to shoot Black suspects than they do white suspects, and minority police officers, specifically including Black police officers, are more likely to pull the trigger on Black suspects than their white counterparts are. So everything about this is a total myth. It's totally nonsensical.
Famous activists.
My people, it's time we stand. It's time we demand the freedom that this land promised.
So they show Tamika Mallory reading spoken word at, I believe, was the Grammys, which just shows how these people are not oppressed people. Every single institution, as laid out by Vice, is backing this organization. It's backing the Black Lives Matter slogan. They're putting out brand integrations. They're having this clown of an activist at the Grammys to read bad spoken word because they're oppressed by all our societal institutions? No, their point of view is the only point of view represented in the mainstream media and mass media as a whole.
I never would have thought meeting black people in the streets, screaming for change and justice and freedom, that would be the people that sell us out. I thought white folk would do that.
Wow, I guess this guy never looked at any crime statistics at all whatsoever, because statistically, that is exactly who would sell you out. And specifically in Ferguson and St. Louis, that area, those are the people who are stealing and committing serious violent crimes and property crimes. And you would think if you're meeting a bunch of them in the street during a riot, you would be able to figure this out. But I'm sure you're surprised, you're so shocked because it wasn't white people. How were white people going to grift off of this unless they were pretending to be black like some activist allegedly is? I wonder who that activist could be.
Unfortunately, there are communities all around the country that also suffer police violence, so why should Black Lives Matter focus on Ferguson or Louisville or one community?
So again, this is actually a good point by the Vice reporter. If this is supposedly a global thing, or at least a national thing with American police going after these minorities, then why should they be running your organization and solving the individual problems in your community that may or may not be related to the police? Spoiler, they're literally not related to the police, but she's implying that they may not be, even though they definitely aren't. But remember, they live in a post-logical, factual world, not like us, where we acknowledge the reality that the problems in Ferguson are due to the actions of the people committing crimes in Ferguson.
Told him, dude, if my son pointed a gun at any one of y'all, show me. I stand down right now.
So I don't like to go after the family members during these cases because I understand no matter what, if you lose a member of your family, you're going to be heartbroken, especially if it's your child. But I do have to point out that her son, age 15, was out near midnight during a particularly deadly weekend in Chicago where 7 people were killed, 40 were injured by gunfire in what the police describe as urban warfare, gang warfare. That's what was going on, and her kid was out during. He also had a .40 caliber handgun on his person at the time that he was shot. Next case.
Every person here is mourning a family member killed by police. Lisa Simpson lost her son, Richard Risher, in 2016.
Again, what Vice doesn't tell you is that Lisa Simpson's son was an even more open and shut case. Richard Risher actually shot and wounded a police officer before he was killed. Couldn't get more clear and obvious than that.
In the days after Risher's death, Simpson started protesting the LAPD alongside the Black Lives Matter Los Angeles chapter. Eventually, she stopped working with the group after a dispute over a fundraiser and a disagreement over how to fight for justice.
But setting aside the facts of the case for a moment, since this isn't the focus of the Vice segment, I do find it incredibly interesting that Black Lives Matter will come out with you, they'll use you to raise money in a fundraiser, and as soon as you start questioning what's going on with this money, how it's going to be spent, about the activism that Black Lives Matter is purportedly doing, they cut you off and they stop talking to you. And that's what this woman is describing when she was angry and wanted to advocate for her son in her own way.
I was a problem.
In March, Simpson and Samaria Rice, the mother of Tamir Rice, who was killed by police in 2014, put out a joint statement. They demanded that high-profile activists, including BLM leaders, stop monopolizing and capitalizing our fight for justice and human rights.
Now, Vice just tried to slip something by us, and I am not going to let that go unaddressed. Vice referenced the statement that her and Tamir Rice's mother released against Black Lives Matter, but they don't go into it more than just showing you the headline. We're not going to play that game. We're going to read this statement just so you can get an idea of how the families of these people who are killed by the police actually feel about the organization. After Tamir and Richard were murdered, when we had to bury our sons, we didn't see Black Lives or Matter. Our DNA changed when our sons were murdered. It took the breath out of our bodies. When y'all go home, y'all chant Black Lives Matter. When we go home, we miss our sons. We don't need y'all to stand in front of us to tell our story. We need y'all to stand in back of us and lift us up. If your agenda is not about helping our children, men, and women, then get out of our way. Enough is enough. We released a public statement that expressed our concerns with Tamika Mallory, Sean King, Benjamin Crump, Lee Merritt, Patrisse Cullors, Melina Abdullah, and the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation to stop capitalizing off our loved ones, and we call on people to join our fight for accountability. So already, my interest is piqued. They are naming names, and we are going to click the link and go read over that statement. Tamika Mallory, Shaun King, Benjamin Crump, Lee Merritt, Patrisse Cullors, Melina Abdullah, and the Black Lives Matter Global Network need to step down and stand back and stop monopolizing and capitalizing our fight for justice and human rights. We never hired them to be the representatives in the fight for justice for our dead loved ones murdered by the police. These, quote, activists have events in our cities and have not given us anything substantial for using our loved ones' images and names on their flyers. The attorneys in our fight are also misleading the impacted families. In the case of Tamir Rice, it was even questionable as to whether Benjamin Crump knew the laws in depth in the state of Ohio. I fired him 6 to 8 months into Tamir's case. So I'm going to have to pause here to make two crucial points. One, when you are licensed by the bar, it is typically the state bar. There are some exemptions where a license will cover 2 states. New York and New Jersey is the only state exemption that I know about where the bar actually covers both. And the reason you're licensed by a state bar is because typically the laws are applied at the state level, and being somebody who's ready to practice in one state doesn't actually prepare you to practice in other states. In fact, one of the tricks that these high-priced trial lawyers often do is they'll actually hire public defenders who have experience in trying case after case to do the work for a fee so that they can be the face of the case, but all the legwork is being done by an outside firm. So these suspicions about Benjamin Crump ring incredibly true to me, and it's something that you need to consider when you're going after the big name, high-priced attorney that doesn't really have a record of practicing in your jurisdiction. But let's continue. We don't want or need y'all parading in the streets, accumulating donations, platforms, movie deals, etc., off the death of our loved ones, while the families and communities are left clueless and broken. Don't say our loved ones' names, period. That's our truth. Now, while there's individual aspects of their statements that I disagree with, obviously, that's not the point I'm trying to communicate by reading what Vice left out. The point I'm trying to communicate is that these people don't feel represented by this organization. Obviously, they're concerned, invested parties, since it's their family members, their loved ones that died, and they, even though they're wrong in a lot of these cases, are trying to pursue some form of justice, or at least gain something that they can take home as some kind of compensation for their loss. But they know that the organization doesn't have their best interests at heart. And remember, this came after Tamika Mallory appeared on the Grammys. This came after multiple different reports of Black Lives Matter activists buying expensive property in white neighborhoods, by the way. And they are looking at this, and they're looking at their own situation and seeing that this just does not line up. In their minds, this is not how an organization that is supposedly supposed to be advocating for them should be acting. They talk about the monetization of their families' deaths, and it's all true. This is what these organizations are doing. This is what these race grifters are doing. They're monetizing something, creating a problem, and selling themselves as the solution. They're providing coursework for corporations and other organizations in order to fight back against this pandemic of ginned up hysterical racism that doesn't actually exist, so that they can avoid liability at their companies. It has nothing to do with actually getting justice for their family members. That's why they don't actually have lawyers that can represent them in any way, shape, or form. All these lawyers show up for are the civil cases. They don't show up for any criminal cases, because if there's a criminal case, you're represented by the state. It doesn't make any sense unless this is about money. And that's what they showed everybody time and time again. And it's refreshing to hear from the family members that they themselves believe that this is true as well.
What do you want from Black Lives Matter at this point?
I want them to pack up all their bags and buy one of them big ass limos they be going partying in and shit, and make sure they pick up every member that they know globally and ride y'all ass out into the sunset.
Again, you absolutely gotta love that. Get in that big ass limo that your organization's people all seem to be riding around in, pack your stuff, and get out. Gotta love it, even though, again, her son's case is not even questionable.
Black Lives Matter Global Network is growing, but this past year, more than 10 chapters broke away, citing a lack of financial transparency and organizational support. They also called on the executive director to step down. She resigned in May, she says, to focus on other projects.
Now, Vice points out, and I give them credit, that other local chapters of the Black Lives Matter organization are also not happy with their national leadership, the Black Lives Matter Global Network, and they've caused somebody at least to step down from their organization. However, now Vice is going to go into damage control mode.
Nevertheless, it's hard to overstate the impact that the global network has had.
Because while this story is largely about them covering the people who are angry with the BLM organization, ultimately Vice is on the side of the Black Lives Matter activists, and they're pushing the same agenda.
In 2020, it was able to pressure several cities to reallocate a total of $170 million from police funds to community services.
Yeah, this was a disastrous policy that led to increased murder rates in multiple different cities across the country, and largely the victims of those increased murder rates were Black people themselves. So this was an absolute disaster. And when these family members were seeking justice for what happened to their family members, I don't think what they had in mind was pulling back all of the police and letting other people get killed by other Black people. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they all support that. Maybe I'm just drawing, crazy conclusions. But this was a terrible policy, and it's a disgusting impact that BLM has had on our society, and I've gone over it in another video.
And its PAC endorsed 44 winning candidates in ballot measures, and the foundation dispersed nearly $22 million in grants.
Again, what Vice is championing here is the endorsement of political candidates with their super PAC. I didn't think that this was about getting left-wing progressives elected to Congress, but apparently that's what it's about. And by the way, I did think that. I knew that the whole time. This was obviously a politically motivated movement.
It's a first step to say that we have to end qualified immunity, but we also know that there's all of these other things that have to be done, and our opposition, our enemy, and all of it is these police associations.
So I just want to point out that ending qualified immunity is an absolute crazy position meant to get rid of police departments altogether. You see, if the police do something wrong against you, you can sue the police. In most scenarios, this is an ideal circumstance. If somebody at Walmart, let's say, didn't put that caution while wet sign on the floor after they mopped and you slipped and got injured, you don't want to sue the minimum wage worker at Walmart. You want to sue Walmart, the organization, which you can do. And that's where the money is, and that's where people are happy to sue. The same thing is true for the police. You don't want to sue typically the individual police officer. You want to sue the police department, the city, the state, whoever has the money so that you can get a settlement for that bad behavior. But what they're trying to do is end that so you can sue the officer personally and bankrupt the officer. And qualified immunity protects officers against multiple frivolous lawsuits that are filed or attempted to be filed against police over everything. They're trying to make it impossible to have any police department in this country and selling it to you as if it's a civil rights movement. This is probably the #1 move to getting rid of the police, abolishing the police, that you could possibly have, and people are pretending like it's not radical to suggest something so absurd. Every other government agency has something similar to this. If something goes wrong when they're performing their duties as a member of that government agency, you sue that agency, not the individual person. We all understand this, or at least I would hope, pray that we all get this, and we all should get it, that this is a way to undermine law enforcement nationwide and make it unworkable. Because who's going to ever want to be a cop if any single arrest can drag you into court and end up bankrupting you?
There was a time when we said Black Lives Matter, people were saying, oh, you can't say that.
Nobody said that. That didn't happen. And we knew why you were saying just Black Lives Matter, because you're founding a racist organization. People who responded with All Lives Matter were stating a principle while you were advocating for a political ideology.
Why are you saying just Black lives? Now everybody says Black Lives Matter.
And the fact that everybody says it now post George Floyd just shows the weakness and backbone that a lot of the American people and all of our institutions have had since that one isolated incident.
You're known to be a racist if you won't say Black Lives Matter.
And that really tells it all. It's just a way to label people racist for not getting on board with your political ideology. This is a Mott and Bailey. They say, oh, oh, well, you got to say Black Lives Matter. Otherwise, you're literally saying black people's lives don't matter. And then you say it, and then they're like, oh, I guess you endorse all of our political stuff. Look at how many people support our political goals that are incredibly unpopular nationwide. This is the game that they're playing. It's not hard to see. She just showed you it.
Can you describe some of the ways that Black Lives Matter works with families?
We are here to be partners in struggle with family members whose loved ones have been stolen by police violence. We show up with them to court hearings when they ask.
So what I love about that is she knows the angle of this interview. So she says, we're partners in struggle. This is something that I think her lawyers likely told her to say, because if you said we're full partners with them, then they might have a basis for litigation against them. That's why she's saying we're partners in the struggle. We're not really with them because you got a bunch of people who talk about how we abandon them. We're with them in the struggle, if you catch my drift. The struggle to get us some nicer houses for the founders. By the way, capitalism is bad. Don't look at our nice houses.
Does Black Lives Matter ever raise money for families or give money directly to families?
So we never, not once, have ever done a fundraiser on behalf of families. What we will do is take their GoFundMe accounts and post them on our social media platforms. But these are their GoFundMe accounts because we want to make sure that the money is never touched by the hands of Black Lives Matter.
Now, that's actually really smart, and it just goes to show you how legally savvy these organizations are, because you never want to be in charge as an organization or an individual of somebody else's money that's being raised by the public. You're essentially going to invite allegations and accusations of you profiting off of whatever you're trying to do a fundraiser for. We've seen this a couple of different times with YouTubers and other people who raise money for homeless people or something like that, and then they wanted a fee or something like that, or there was an allegation that they were withholding the money due to some undue terms for the person that they were supposed to be raising it for. So it's good of them to try to avoid that from a legal and strategic standpoint. And the way that she says we never ever raise money for the families, we just link to their stuff, is trying to separate herself from any liability in terms of having to contribute any money to members of the family.
When people donate towards Black Lives Matter, do you think it's a misconception that people think it does go directly to families?
So we say straight up, like when you donate to Black Lives Matter, you are donating for the organizing work. You are donating for our advocacy work. You're donating for things like having a sound system, for things like making sure that there is food at meetings. But we're not a social service organization. We are a power building organization.
So I got to point out two things. One, there they say it clear as day, Black Lives Matter doesn't actually help the individuals. That's not what their fundraising is for. It's actually a good question by the Vice reporter. Credit where credit is due. That she was asking, don't you think that people are under the impression when you do a fundraiser and you use the face of somebody killed by the police, that part of that money is going to members of the family that you're using their kid for your fundraiser? Like, doesn't that make sense? And I do like that they actually cut to the turntable. This is on the editor to show her when she's saying you're paying for all this, because that is a great representation of the issue that many members of the family actually have. When you donate to Black Lives Matter, the organization, you're not donating to help the supposed victims of police brutality. You're donating to get fancy things like turntables at their events.
Nobody could have predicted George Floyd's death. Nobody could have predicted the movement from last year. So do you think that Black Lives Matter was prepared to get $90 million in funds?
Of course we weren't prepared to receive $90 million. Nobody was prepared for Black Lives Matter to become the largest racial and social justice movement in history. But we are grateful that we had a movement that was there to meet the moment. But of course, we weren't prepared for how massive the moment would be.
Again, these people do not come off as grassroots activists that are standing up to oppression. They come off as savvy, coached by lawyers kind of people. All of their responses are incredibly processed, and none of them are raw and emotional. They're trying to say whatever they need to say to avoid anything in this segment being taken in a way that could lead to them having legal liability. It's absolutely amazing when you understand legal phraseology and you understand how lawyers coach people to see it on display in full. And I wish, if you guys don't get what I'm driving at, you would understand it as well as I can explain it. But really, I can just point it out if you're not familiar with how lawyers get people to talk about certain things when there's risk or arguments about money and there may be pending legal action. This is exactly how you do it. She's doing an excellent job. This is a very coached coached and processed woman. So all in all, my takeaway of this segment is that, of course, Black Lives Matter, in my opinion, is a scam. I don't think that people realize that when you're donating to this nonprofit organization, that you're donating to something that's going to be connected to a super PAC that's going to run political advertisements to go after the Republican Party. People are under the impression when they donate money to BLM that it's going to be dispersed in some way or shape or form to specifically the cause of police brutality or to the family members to help their legal fight against their individual organizations. I don't think that's an absurd concern for people to be worried about. And even though I don't think Black Lives Matter has been proven or it's even really been alleged that they've done anything illegal, I think it's really sketchy, and it's sketchy that all of our corporations are donating to this organization that is clearly enriching the founders. But hey, those are just my thoughts, and because you're out there in my audience, I'm gonna get a sense that you guys probably don't disagree with me, but if you do, leave your wrong opinion down in the comments below. If you liked the video, you show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content. Social media is linked in the description. Support links also there as well. Thank you guys so much for the support that you gave after my last video. Really appreciate it. This has been me talking about BLM, the organization, versus the families. Till next time.